Solving application problems using systems of equations. What we're going to do with this particular problem is we're going to determine how we can generate a system of equations based upon a lot of information that's given to us in the problem. What we're going to have to do is create variables to represent different aspects of the problem and then assign values to those variables and then try to solve the system simultaneously for all those values. A person plans to invest a total of $170,000 in a money market account, a bond fund, an international stock fund, and a domestic stock fund. She wants 60% of her investment to be conservative, money market and bonds. She wants the amount in domestic stocks to be 4 times the amount in international stocks. Finally, she needs an annual return of $6,800. Assuming she gets annual returns of 2.5% on the money market account, 3.5% on the bond fund, 4% on the international stock fund, and 6% on the domestic stock fund, how much should she put in each investment? Well, the first thing that you should do whenever you're trying to solve a problem like this is do what I just did. Read the problem in its entirety before you do anything. This way your brain can already be focusing on the different aspects of the problem, and then you can go back and you can start to pick it apart so that you can look for the important pieces of information, and you can determine if there's nothing in there or if there's something in there that might not be important that you can safely ignore. These problems are all done pretty much the same. And what you need to do is focus on the fact that whatever the problem wants you to find is generally going to be in the last statement. How much should she invest in each investment? So now what we need to do is we need to go back and we need to look at all of everything that's in there. The first thing that you want to do is look and understand that we're going to invest a total of $170,000. But where are we going to invest that? Well, we're going to invest it in a money market account. We're going to invest it in a bond fund. We're going to invest it in an international stock. And we're going to invest it in a domestic stock fund. So now what we need are variables to represent those. So it should make sense that for the money market account, we'll use M. For the bond fund, we'll use B. For the international stock fund, we'll go ahead and use I. And finally, for the domestic stock fund, we'll use D. We could also use X sub 1, X sub 2, X sub 3, and X sub 4. And generally speaking, as you delve further and further into linear algebra applications, you're going to want to generally use X with subscripts or some other variable with subscripts. You can differentiate between the different variables, but they're all the same letter. But we're going to stick with the M, B, I, and D for this one. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to take the information that's given and we're going to create some linear equations. Now you can do this with nonlinear equations, and this goes into much more complex problems, but for this one it's going to be a linear equation. Remembering that a linear equation is an equation that does not have a variable in the denominator or does not have a variable with an exponent or underneath a radical sign. So let's go ahead and understand what we're looking at. These letters right here are going to represent dollar signs or value amounts. And what we're going to do is we're going to take these 4 funds and we're going to add them together because we know that we're investing $170,000. So we'll take M plus B plus I plus D and set that equal to 170,000. But that's only part of it, because what we need to do now is generate some other equations that will let us solve this system simultaneously so that we can come up with values for each one of the variables. So we're going to delve further into the information given. And we note right here that she wants 60% of her investment to be conservative. That would mean being in money market and bonds. So what we can do is look at that and say, all right, 60% of her investment. Well, remember, her investment is $170,000. So 60% of that is what we're going to put into the money market and bonds. So if we take the money market investment and add that to the bond investment, that's going to be equal to 60% of the $170,000 investment. Remembering that 60% written as a decimal is 0.60 or just simply 0.6. So I'm just going to write that here without actually doing the multiplication. I'll do that in a moment, but I'm just trying to set this up so that you can see how everything is put together. Now the next thing that we're going to look at is that she wants the amount in domestic stocks to be 4 times the amount in international stocks. Okay, so domestic stocks is 4 times the international stocks. So I can set up an equation that says D is equal to 4I. Now, of course, I'm going to want to rewrite that so that I've got the D and the I all on the same side of the equal sign, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, this last equation can be a little tricky to set up, but why do we need a last equation? Well, we have 4 unknowns, and the way it's set up right now, we're going to need 4 equations to solve for the 4 unknowns. So then we look at this and we see that finally she needs an annual return of $6,800. That means that her investment is going to return $6,800. And you'll see that I've set it up as equals $6,800. Now, assuming she gets an annual return of 2.5% on the money market. Well, what does that mean? Well, 2.5% as a decimal is the following, 0.025. So I will go ahead and take that value and multiply it by the money market investment. Then we're going to add to that the next component, which is going to be 3.5% on the bond fund. Remembering that 3.5% can be written as 0.035, and we will multiply that by the bond, B. And then we're going to add to that the next component, which is going to be 4% on the international stock fund. So 4% is going to be equal to 0.04. And so what we're going to do, and let me drop down here because I'm not going to have sufficient room, is we're going to add that, and actually let me rearrange this. So we'll have 0.04 times the international stock fund, and then finally she's going to get 6% on the domestic stock fund, and we know that 6% is going to be simply 0.06, and so we'll multiply that by D, and now you'll see that we have 4 equations. Now, like I said, I'm going to rewrite D equals 4I by subtracting 4I from both sides of this thing. And so what I want to do is change it so that it looks like the following. I'm just going to write it as negative 4I minus D is equal to, and I think I may have said negative 4I minus D, but it's supposed to be plus D. So what I can do now is I can safely eliminate this equation because I've replaced it with this one right here. And now I have a system of 4 equations in 4 unknowns. Another thing that I want to do is go ahead and multiply 0.6 by 170,000. In doing so, I will know exactly what amount the investment in the money market plus the investment in the bond fund is going to be equal to. And when I multiply that, I end up with the following: 102,000. And remember, that's going to be M plus B. And I'll put the M right here, plus, and then simply B. And then I don't have to worry about that equation anymore. And I'm just going to go ahead and take this equation and I'm going to rewrite it below the other equations so that they're all kind of together. And now we want to solve this. Now there's a couple of ways that we can do this. I can go ahead and I can go back to this one and say, well, I could have left this as D equals 4i and then substituted 4i in everywhere I saw D in the other equations. And then I could go ahead and come to this one and say, okay, well, let's go ahead and subtract B from both sides so that M is equal to 102,000 B, and then I can plug that into the other equations and I end up with a system that's only got two variables, and then I can use either elimination or substitution. But instead, what I'm going to do is use an online matrix calculator. And that's going to be matrixcalc.org/en/. And what I'm going to do is, using this calculator, and this is something that you may have already been using for some of the problems, but instead of just plugging in numbers into this matrix, what I want to do is solve a systems of linear equations. And if you look very carefully, and let me blow this up a little bit, you'll notice that they have x sub 1, x sub 2, x sub 3, x sub 4, which is one of the reasons that I talked about that previously. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and make sure that I know that M is going to be x sub 1, B is going to be x sub 2, I is going to be x sub 3, and then D is going to be x sub 4. And now I'm going to go ahead and input these values into the matrix calculator. So and I want to do that so that I can see everything that I'm doing. Okay. So right here we'll put in 0.025. I can use the tab to move over. I can also use the left and right arrow keys on my keyboard to go up and down. And so we'll put 0.035. This is going to be 0.04, 0.06, and then on this side I'm going to put 6800. Then, whoops, too far. I'm going to go ahead and come back over here, and I don't have anything in this equation right here for either M or B, so I'm not going to put anything there for x sub 1 or x sub 2 except for zeros. I don't have to in this calculator, but I'm going to do it for illustrative purposes. This is going to be a -4, and then we will simply put a 1 right here. And then we will put 0 here. Then we'll move to the third equation, and we note that we have M and B, which will be x sub 1 and x sub 2, but no I or D, so therefore no x sub 3 or x sub 4. M has a coefficient of 1, likewise B has a coefficient of 1, and then since x sub 3 and x sub 4, i.e. I and D, will not need to be part of this equation, we'll put zeros, and this will be equal to 102,000. And then finally, we'll come to the fourth equation, which is M plus B plus I plus D, and notice that all four of those variables will have a coefficient of 1. And that's going to be equal to 170,000. And then what I want to do, and let me go ahead and expand this. I'm going to come down here, and there's different ways to solve this. You're always going to get the same answer no matter how you use these to solve, but I want to solve by Gauss-Jordan elimination. I simply left click that, and it's going to go ahead and do all of the row operations. And eventually I'm going to get down to this right here. And this is what I'm interested in. X sub 1 is 57,800. X sub 2 is 44,200. X sub 3 is 13,600. X sub 4 is equal to 54,400. And so what I'm going to do is copy that and bring it into the notes. And now that I've done that, remembering that this one is going to be M, money market. This one is B, bonds. This one is I, which is international stocks. And this one is D, which is domestic stocks. And so since it's a word problem, an application problem, I want to go ahead and write out the answer using complete sentences. However, depending on what sort of publisher resources you're using, you may only have to input these values into the program without having to write it all out. But if she wants to get a $6,800 return, investing $170,000 into a money market account earning 2.5% interest, into a bond account earning 3.5%, investing in an international stock fund earning 4%, and investing into a domestic stock fund earning 6%, this is the breakdown. She will need to invest $57,800 in the money market. She will need to invest $44,200 in bonds. Invest $13,600 in international stocks. And that's actually an international stock fund. And then she would need to invest $54,400 in a domestic stock fund. Now, to make sure that you've done this correctly, what you want to do is total these four values. If when you total them, you get $170,000, which you will, because I've already done that real quick in my head, you know that you've done this correctly.